When I was 22 years old, I thought I was finally stepping into adulthood. I had just landed a job in New York City. A real job. The kind of job you tell your family about with pride. The kind that makes you feel like everything is finally starting. There was only one problem. I didn't live in the city. I was still in Jersey. And anyone who knows that commute knows it's not something you can do every day without slowly losing your mind. So moving wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. But there was another problem. I didn't have money. Not real money, anyway. I had enough saved for groceries, maybe a cheap mattress. But New York rent? That was a completely different universe. Every apartment listing I clicked on felt like a joke. $2,000 for a closet. $3,000 for a studio that looked like a hallway with a sink. I started to feel hopeless. Until one night, I saw it. A listing. Craigslist. Hell's Kitchen. Private bedroom. Extremely affordable. Available immediately. The price was so low I thought it had to be a scam. But the pictures looked normal. A clean apartment. A decent bedroom. A perfect location. My brain immediately started making excuses. Maybe the landlord was just desperate. Maybe it was rent-controlled. Maybe I'd finally gotten lucky. I messaged the number immediately. And to my surprise, they replied within an hour. We set up a viewing for the next day. I barely slept that night. The following afternoon, I took the train into Manhattan. The city felt louder than usual, like it was testing me. The address led me to an older building tucked between two restaurants. Nothing fancy, but nothing alarming either. I buzzed the apartment number. A few seconds passed. Then a click. The door opened. I climbed the stairs to the second floor. My heart pounding like this was some kind of interview. When I knocked, the door opened almost instantly. A man stood there. Mid-40s maybe. Thin. Pale. His smile was strange. Not friendly. Not unfriendly. Just stiff. Like he wasn't used to doing it. "Hey," he said, voice quiet. "You're here about the room." "Yeah," I replied. Thanks for meeting me." He nodded quickly. "I'm the landlord." Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. But I ignored that. He stepped aside and motioned me in. The apartment was dim even though it was daytime. The curtains were drawn. The air felt stale, like it hadn't been aired out in weeks. Still, it was New York. I told myself that was normal. He showed me the kitchen first. Small, but functional. Then the living room. A couch. A coffee table. A television that looked like it hadn't been turned on in years. Then finally, the bedroom. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. A door I could close. A space in the city. I was already imagining my life here. Commuting to work. Exploring Manhattan. Starting over. Then the man cleared his throat. "There is one thing. Here it comes," I thought. "The catch. You'd have a roommate." I blinked. "Oh, okay. Honestly, I expected that. Most affordable apartments in New York come with roommates." I asked, "What's he like?" The landlord hesitated, then said, quiet. "Keeps to himself. Doesn't bother anyone." That sounded perfect. I wasn't exactly looking for a best friend. "What's his name?" I asked. "Bren." I waited. The landlord looked toward a closed door down the hallway. "That's his room." Then, to my surprise, the landlord walked over and knocked. "Bren?" he called. "Someone's here to see the room. Want to come out and say hello?" Silence. He knocked again. Nothing. The landlord turned back toward me, shrugging awkwardly. He might be sleeping. Sleeping? At 2 in the afternoon? I forced a smile. No worries. But something about it felt off. Not that Bren didn't come out. More like... The landlord didn't seem bothered at all, almost like he expected it. We returned to the living room. I asked a few questions. Utilities included. Month to month. Deposit required. Everything sounded almost too easy. Before leaving, I said I was interested. He handed me an application. I filled it out on the spot. The next morning, he called. You got it, he said simply. I couldn't believe it. I was moving to New York. A week later, my dad drove into the city with me in a rented van filled with my stuff: a mattress, a dresser, boxes of clothes, cheap kitchen supplies, the kind of belongings that scream young adults starting from scratch. The landlord let us in. Same stiff smile, same dim apartment. As we carried my things inside, I kept expecting, any second, for Bren to appear, to introduce himself, to complain about the noise, to say literally anything. But he didn't. Still, we heard movement behind his door, footsteps, shifting, like someone was definitely in there. My dad noticed too. He leaned close and whispered, "Your roommate shy or something?" I chuckled nervously. "Guess so." We finished unloading. My dad clapped me on the shoulder. "You'll be all right," he said. Then he left. The door shut behind him. And suddenly, I was alone, truly alone, in a strange apartment, with a roommate I hadn't even met. I sat on my bed and opened my laptop. Netflix. Something comforting. Something normal. I tried to relax. Maybe Bren was just socially awkward. Maybe he had anxiety. Whatever. I could deal with that. Then, I heard it. A door opening. Slow. Creaking. Bren's door. My heart jumped. This was it. He was finally coming out. I stood up, ready to introduce myself. But before I could even reach my own door, the front door of the apartment slammed shut. Hard, like someone stormed out. I froze, then stepped into the living room. No one was there. The apartment was silent. I stared at the front door. Did he just leave without saying a word? That was weird. But fine. I went back to my room, ate ramen, laid down. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up. The apartment door was closing again. Click. Then, footsteps. Slow, heavy. On the creaky wooden floor. They moved down the hallway, toward my room. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door. I stared at the crack beneath it. Light from the hallway spilled through. And then, I saw them. Feet. Just standing there. Not moving. Not pacing. Just waiting. My skin went cold. Why was he standing there? Was he listening? Was he trying to decide whether to come in? My door wasn't locked. I hadn't even thought to lock it. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stayed frozen in bed, praying he would leave. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, the feet turned. The footsteps moved away, back toward his room. His door shut. I exhaled shakily. But sleep never came again. Because all night, from behind Bren's door, I heard thumps, dull, heavy impacts, over and over, like something being dragged, or dropped, or worse. I didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't want to find out. I didn't confront him. I didn't knock on his door. I didn't even step into the hallway again. I just lay there, staring at my ceiling, listening. The apartment was quiet now, too quiet. But my mind wasn't. It kept replaying that moment. The feet under my door, the way he stood there, completely still, like he was deciding something, like he was waiting for the right time. Eventually, morning came. A thin gray light crept through my curtains. I sat up slowly, exhausted. The apartment felt empty. No footsteps, no noises, no thumping. I cautiously opened my bedroom door. The hallway was clear. Bren's door was shut. I didn't hear anything inside. Maybe he was gone. Maybe he worked early. Maybe I was overreacting. I kept telling myself that. This was New York. People were weird. Roommates were awkward. This was normal. Right? I spent most of the day outside. I needed air. I needed crowds. I needed anything that didn't feel like that suffocating apartment. I bought groceries. Basic stuff. Bread, eggs, ramen, coffee. I picked up little things for my room, a cheap lamp, a shower curtain. Anything that made it feel more like home. When I returned in the afternoon, the apartment was still silent. Bren still hadn't come out. I dropped the grocery bags onto the couch and let myself breathe. Maybe he was away for the weekend. Maybe he was visiting family. I cooked dinner, ate alone, and tried to relax with Netflix again. Hours passed. Nothing. No door, no footsteps, no roommate. By night, I was almost starting to convince myself that maybe he didn't even live here anymore. That thought didn't comfort me. It unsettled me more, because if Bren wasn't here, then what was I hearing? Later that night, I realized I'd forgotten toothpaste. Something so stupid. Something so normal. So I ran down the block to a nearby 7-Eleven. The streets were alive with noise, people laughing, cars honking. It reminded me that life was still normal outside. The horror only existed inside that apartment. I was gone maybe 10 minutes. When I came back, I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately froze. Bren's door was open. Just slightly. A crack. And light was spilling out into the hallway. My stomach tightened. That door had been shut all day, hadn't it? I stood there, keys still in my hand, staring. This was my chance. The normal roommate introduction. The thing that should have happened the first day. Maybe he was finally ready to talk. I walked slowly down the hallway. Every step felt louder than it should have. The apartment was dead silent. I stopped outside his door. I hesitated, then knocked lightly. Twice. No response. I swallowed. "Hey, Bren. It's me. I just moved in." Nothing. The crack of the door seemed darker now, like the room was watching me. My hand lifted. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. Not messy. Not half-packed. Empty. Completely. No bed. No dresser. No clothes. No posters. No signs of life. Just bare walls, and in the far corner, a single chair. The kind of chair you'd find in a classroom. Metal legs. Hard plastic seat, facing the wall, like someone had been sitting there, just staring. My breath caught in my throat. I stood in the doorway, unable to move. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a roommate's room. This wasn't even a bedroom. It looked like a set. A fake room. A stage. A trap. The air inside felt colder. Heavier. I flicked the light switch instinctively, even though the light was already on. Nothing changed. The chair remained. Silent. Waiting. I backed away slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I shut the door. I didn't even pull it closed gently. I slammed it. Then I hurried back to my own room and locked my door. My hands were shaking violently now. Something was very, very wrong. There was no Bren. There never had been. So who had been standing outside my door last night? Who had been making those noises? Who was in this apartment with me? I sat on my bed, breathing hard. A headache began to bloom behind my eyes. I needed answers. I grabbed my phone. The landlord. I had to call him. I dialed his number with trembling fingers. The phone rang once, twice, and then a sound, a ringing sound. Not from my phone, from inside my room. My blood turned to ice. The ringing was muffled, close, too close. My eyes slowly shifted toward my closet. The closet door was slightly ajar. The ringing was coming from inside. I couldn't breathe. The landlord's phone was in my closet, which meant he wasn't answering because he couldn't. Or worse, he was choosing not to. My body went numb. A sick, horrifying realization crawled through my mind like a spider. The landlord was here, in my room, right now. And Bren was never real. The ringing stopped. Silence returned. My ears were buzzing. I stared at that closet door. My entire body screamed not to open it, but my mind couldn't stop imagining what was inside. A man, watching, smiling that stiff smile, waiting. I slowly slid off the bed. My feet barely touched the floor. Every step toward the closet felt impossible. I reached out. my fingers inches away from the knob, and then I stopped. Because suddenly, I realized something. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. That meant he had declined the call. He was awake. He was listening. He was right there, in the dark, in my closet. I snapped back like my hand had touched fire. I didn't open it. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I ran. I ran out of my room, down the hallway, straight into the bathroom. I slammed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Then I called 911. My voice came out broken. "Someone's in my apartment. I think he's hiding. Please." The dispatcher stayed calm. Told me officers were on the way. Told me to stay locked inside. Every second felt like a lifetime. I could hear faint movement outside. Soft, careful, like someone repositioning. Waiting. Listening. Finally, heavy knocks. "Police. Open up." I almost collapsed with relief. I unlocked the bathroom door. 2 officers entered, hands on their weapons. I pointed down the hallway with trembling fingers. "My room, the closet, he's in there." They moved quickly, sweeping the apartment, checking corners, opening doors. My chest was tight, my vision blurred. Then one officer returned. His expression was grim. "Ma'am, stay back." They went into my room. I heard furniture shifting. Then, got him. My knees nearly gave out. They dragged someone out, not from the closet, not from Bren's room, but from under my bed. The landlord, his face twisted into something ugly. No smile now, just rage, just insanity. I couldn't even speak. The officer looked at me. "This man doesn't own this apartment." "What?" I whispered. "He's not a landlord. There's no lease. Nothing." My stomach dropped. The officer continued. "He broke in. He's been squatting here. I felt like I was going to vomit. So, Bren?" The officer shook his head. "No roommate. Never was." I stared at the empty hallway, the empty chair in that room, and suddenly I understood. The thumping noises, the footsteps, the standing outside my door. It was always him. Always watching. Always waiting. The next day, my dad came immediately. We packed everything in silence. Neither of us wanted to stay one more minute. As we carried my mattress out, I glanced back at the apartment one last time. It looked normal, just an apartment. But I knew what was inside. A man hiding. A fake roommate. A trap disguised as a cheap deal. I moved back home that night, and for weeks after, I couldn't sleep without checking my closet. Because the scariest part wasn't that he was caught. The scariest part was how close I came to opening that door. I didn't stay to watch them take him away. I didn't want to hear him speak. I didn't want an explanation. Because what explanation could possibly make sense? How do you explain a man pretending to be a landlord, inventing a roommate that never existed, just to lure someone into moving into an apartment alone? The police asked me questions. A lot of questions. How did I find the listing? Did I sign anything? Did he ever touch me? Did he ever threaten me? I answered everything in a daze. Craigslist. A cheap deal. A fake application. A fake lease. A fake roommate. It was all fake. The officer's voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. He looked disturbed, like even he had seen enough horror in his career to recognize when something was deeply wrong. "This guy," he muttered quietly, "has probably done this before." That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Done this before. Meaning, I wasn't special. I wasn't chosen. I was just the next person unlucky enough to answer his ad. My skin crawled. That night I couldn't sleep. Even though I wasn't in the apartment anymore. Even though the man was in handcuffs. Even though the police were involved. None of it mattered. Because my brain kept replaying the smallest details. The things that didn't seem scary at first, but now felt unbearable. The dim lighting. The drawn curtains. The stale air. The way the landlord never seemed surprised that Bren didn't answer. The way Bren never existed. The way I heard footsteps, but never saw a face. And the chair. That chair. Sitting alone in an empty room. Like a symbol. Like a warning. Or worse, like a place he sat. Waiting. Watching. Practicing. The next morning my dad arrived before sunrise. He didn't even knock. He called my name from the hallway like he was afraid to step inside. We packed quickly. No talking. Just moving. Box after box. Bag after bag. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that stiff smile again, half expecting to hear the closet door creak, half expecting something impossible. My dad finally broke the silence. How long was he in there? I didn't understand at first. Then I realized what he meant. How long was that man hiding inside the apartment? Before I even moved in? Had he been sleeping there? Watching the building, waiting for someone to respond to his ad? My throat tightened. I don't know, I whispered. And the truth was, I didn't want to know. When we finished loading the van, my dad slammed the back doors shut like he was sealing a coffin. We drove out of the city. The skyline faded behind us. Most people look at New York and see opportunity. Dreams, freedom. But all I could think of was that apartment, that hallway, that empty room, that chair, and the sound of feet standing just outside my door. Later, I tried pressing charges. I wanted him punished. I wanted answers. I wanted closure. But the situation was worse than I thought. The police told me something that made my blood run cold all over again. There was no lease. What? I said. The paperwork wasn't real. The man doesn't own the apartment. My stomach dropped. So, what was he? A squatter, the officer replied. He somehow got access to the building, broke in, made listings online, pretended it was his. I couldn't believe it. The apartment wasn't even his. The landlord wasn't a landlord. The roommate wasn't a roommate. The entire thing was a lie, a stage, a trap, and I had walked right into it. For weeks afterward, I stayed with my parents. I told myself I was safe. But safety didn't feel real anymore. Every sound at night made my heart race. A creak in the floor, a door closing, a phone vibrating. I couldn't stop checking my closet. I couldn't stop looking under my bed. Because the terrifying truth is, monsters don't always break down doors. Sometimes, they hand you keys. Sometimes, they smile politely. Sometimes, they post ads online. A month later, I found another apartment. A real one. A verified one. With contracts. With roommates who actually existed. With locks that worked. But even then, the paranoia never fully left. Because once you realize how easy it is for someone to slip into your life, how easy it is for evil to hide behind something normal, you never see the world the same way again. I still think back to that first day, sitting on my bed, hearing Bren's door open, thinking I was finally going to meet my roommate, thinking this was the start of my new life. But it wasn't. It was the start of a nightmare, and the only reason I survived it is because I didn't open that closet door. If I had, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know what he planned. I don't know how long he would have stayed hidden. But I know one thing. When people warn you about deals that seem too good to be true, listen. Because sometimes, the price isn't money. Sometimes, the price is realizing you were never alone in that apartment. Not for a single second. After everything happened, people kept asking me the same question. How did you not notice sooner? How did you trust him? Why didn't you leave the first night? But those questions only come from people who have never been in that kind of fear. Because fear doesn't feel like a movie. It doesn't feel dramatic. Fear feels quiet. Fear feels like convincing yourself that you're overreacting. Because the alternative is admitting you're in real danger. And that first week, I kept choosing denial. I kept choosing comfort. Because I wanted so badly for New York to work out. I wanted my new life. I wanted to believe that Bren was just an awkward roommate and that the landlord was just socially strange. But the truth was, my instincts had been screaming from the very beginning. Even now, months later, I can still remember the exact sound of those footsteps. That creaky wooden floor didn't just make noise, it complained. Every step was a warning, and when the feet stopped outside my door, it felt like time itself froze. The air got heavier. My body refused to move. And the scariest part, he didn't try the handle. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He just stood there, like he was listening to my breathing, like he was memorizing me. That wasn't a roommate. That was a predator. People think the worst part was finding him under my bed, but honestly, that wasn't the part that stayed with me. The part that stayed with me was Bren's room. That empty room. That single chair. Because it meant something. It meant he created an illusion, a performance, a fake person, a fake life. And that chair felt like the center of it. Like that's where he sat at night, just waiting. Waiting for someone to move in. Waiting for someone to be alone. Waiting for the perfect moment. That chair wasn't furniture. It was a message. When the cops took him away, I assumed it was over. I assumed I was safe. But before they left, one of the officers pulled me aside. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Listen, you need to understand something." I stared at him, still shaking. He continued. "This guy wasn't just trespassing." "What do you mean?" I asked. The officer sighed. "We found things in his backpack." My stomach turned. "What things?" He paused, then said quietly, "Pictures." My blood went cold. Pictures of what? The officer didn't want to say it. But his face told me everything. Women, apartments, bedrooms, hallways. My knees almost gave out. He'd done this before. He'd been watching other people before me. I wasn't the first. I was just the one who called the police in time. In the days after, I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was. How simple. A fake name. A cheap price. A few photos. And suddenly, a stranger has access to your life. Your space. Your sleep. Your safety. I deleted Craigslist that same night. Not because Craigslist itself is evil, but because I realized something. Predators don't need dark alleys anymore. They don't need masks. They just need Wi-Fi. On the drive back to Jersey, my dad didn't speak much. His hands gripped the steering wheel like he was holding back rage. Finally, he said, "You know what scares me the most?" I swallowed. "What?" He glanced at me. "That man was inside that apartment. And you didn't even know." I felt tears burn my eyes. My dad continued, "You could have been asleep, and he could have been standing right there, and no one would have known." That was the moment it truly hit me, not as a story, not as a creepy memory, but as reality. I had been hunted. For the next few days, I couldn't do anything normal. Even the simplest things felt wrong. Eating felt wrong. Sleeping felt impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain dragged me back into that apartment, back into that hallway, back into the moment I heard the front door close, and realized someone was inside with me. My parents tried to comfort me. But how do you explain something like that? How do you explain that your sense of safety has been ripped out of your chest? That your own bedroom no longer feels like a sanctuary? It felt like the world had changed shape, and I was the only one who could see it. People love hearing scary stories. They love the twist. They love the adrenaline. But nobody talks about what happens after. After the police lights fade. After the man is taken away. After the danger is technically gone. Because the fear doesn't leave with him. It stays. It settles into your bones. For weeks, I couldn't sleep unless the closet door was sealed shut. I pushed a chair against it every night. I checked under my bed 3 times before lying down. Sometimes I'd wake up suddenly, heart racing, certain that I'd heard footsteps. But it was only silence, only my mind replaying the nightmare. About a week later, I got a phone call. A detective. His voice was professional but serious. "We're still investigating the suspect," he said. I sat up straighter. "What did you find?" There was a pause. Then he spoke carefully. "We believe he's been doing this across multiple buildings." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "He targets vacant apartments, gains access through stolen keys or unlocked entrances. Then he posts fake listings online." My skin crawled. "So, I wasn't random?" "No," the detective replied. "You were selected because you were alone. Young. New to the city." I felt sick. The detective continued. "And the roommate story, that's his method," I whispered. "The fake roommate." "Yes," he said. "It lowers suspicion. People think, oh, it's just a quiet roommate." My hands trembled. It wasn't just deception. It was strategy. Predatory strategy. Before the detective hung up, I forced myself to ask something. The chair. In the empty room. There was silence. "What about it?" he asked. I swallowed hard. Why was it there? The detective exhaled. "We don't know for sure." Then, in a quieter voice, he said, "But sometimes offenders create spaces like that. To watch, to wait, to control." My stomach dropped. That chair wasn't random. It was intentional. That room wasn't Bren's room. It was his room, his place to sit in the dark. Listening, planning, waiting for the night. That night I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. And suddenly a thought hit me so hard I felt dizzy. The phone ringing in my closet, that meant he was close. But what if? What if he had been there longer? What if, while my dad and I were moving boxes in, he was already inside? Watching us? Standing somewhere unseen? What if the entire time I was unpacking, I wasn't moving into an apartment, I was stepping into his trap? My breathing turned shallow. I couldn't stop imagining it. Him hiding. Waiting. Letting me get comfortable. Letting me feel safe. Because predators don't rush. They savor. A few days later, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I searched online. I typed the address. I typed the listing details. And what I found made my blood run cold. There were other posts, different usernames, different apartments, but the same wording, the same line. Roommate is quiet, keeps to himself. The same fake name, Bren. Always Bren. Like a ghost roommate, a fictional character designed to make people feel less alone, while actually making them more vulnerable. I realized then, Bren wasn't a person. Bren was a mask, a story he used again and again. When I finally started apartment hunting again, I was a different person. I didn't trust listings. I didn't trust landlords. I didn't trust cheap prices. I didn't trust locked doors. Every building felt suspicious. Every hallway felt like that hallway. I toured apartments with my dad, even though I was embarrassed. I checked ownership records. I asked for identification. I demanded contracts. Some landlords looked annoyed. Some looked offended. But I didn't care, because I wasn't being difficult. I was surviving. Months later, I got one final update. The man had been charged, not just with trespassing, but with multiple crimes. Fraud. Breaking and entering. Stalking. The detective didn't tell me everything. But his tone said enough. This wasn't just some awkward squatter. This wasn't just a creepy landlord. This was something darker. Something calculated. And I had been one of his closest near misses. Even now, sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still think about that first evening, sitting on my bed, hearing the door open, thinking it was my roommate, thinking I was finally meeting Bren. But Bren was never real. Bren was just a name, a shadow, a distraction. The truth was, I was living with the landlord the entire time. Not as a tenant, not as a roommate, but as prey. And the scariest part? If I hadn't called, if I had opened that closet, you wouldn't be hearing this story. I thought once he was arrested, it would all be over. That life would simply reset. That I'd go back to being the same person I was before I answered that Craigslist ad. But trauma doesn't work like that. Fear doesn't disappear just because the police say you're safe. Fear rewires you. It changes the way you look at doors, at hallways, at silence, at being alone. A few months later, I was asked to appear in court. I didn't want to. The idea of seeing him again made my stomach twist. But my dad insisted. He told me something simple. If you don't face it, it'll chase you forever. So I went. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cold air. I sat in a hard wooden bench, hands clenched in my lap. Then they brought him in. The man who had smiled at me. The man who had pretended to be a landlord. The man who had stood outside my bedroom door in the dark. He looked smaller, not powerful, not intimidating, just pathetic. But when his eyes lifted and locked onto mine, my blood ran cold, because the smile returned, that same stiff, unnatural smile, like he was amused that I was there, like he was still in control. I looked away immediately. After the hearing, the detective spoke to me privately. "There's something you should know," he said. My heart sank. "What?" He hesitated, then said, "When we searched him, we found a notebook filled with addresses, dates, apartment numbers, notes, quiet building, single tenant, no cameras." My throat tightened. He'd been planning, studying, tracking. Then the detective said the words that made my vision blur. "Your name wasn't the first one in that book." I felt dizzy. "How many?" I whispered. The detective didn't answer directly, but his silence was louder than any number. I asked the question that had haunted me since the beginning. How did he get the keys? The detective sighed. "We believe he worked maintenance jobs. Temporary work. Cleaning crews." My stomach turned. "He learned how buildings work," the detective continued. "Which doors get left unlocked. Which spare keys get hidden. He didn't break in like a burglar. He slipped in like a ghost. That was worse, because it meant anyone could." Before I left, the detective stopped me one last time. "There's one more thing." I froze. "What?" He lowered his voice. "That empty room, the one with the chair." I nodded slowly. "We found fingerprints," he said. My breath caught. "On the chair?" "Yes." I swallowed hard. "And?" The detective's face tightened. "They weren't just his." My body went numb. "What do you mean?" He stared at me, serious. "We found prints from other people. Other tenants. Other victims. People who had sat there. People who had been in that apartment before me. Maybe confused. Maybe trapped. Maybe never making it out the way I did." I couldn't breathe. That chair wasn't just for waiting. It was for something else. Something ritualistic. Something sick. A place where he made people feel powerless. A place where he watched them break. I did move back to New York eventually. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I refused to let him steal the city from me. I found a real apartment. A real lease. Real roommates. Real locks. But even now, years later, I still do certain things without thinking. I lock my bedroom door every night. I check closets in hotels. I never trust deals that seem too perfect. And I never ignore that feeling in my stomach. That instinct that whispers, something is wrong. The scariest part of this story isn't the man. It isn't Craigslist. It isn't the empty room. It's the fact that evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks like an awkward landlord. Sometimes it sounds like a quiet roommate. Sometimes it hides under your bed, while you're lying above it, thinking you're alone. And the truth is, I wasn't alone in that apartment. Not for a single second.